I think I have a new holiday. Have you heard about this? It is No-vember. I just learned about this on Facebook. And the concept of November is to say no to all of the things that, let's be honest, you want to say no to. No to the things that drain your energy, that take time away from the things that are important to you. And saying no to the things that prevent you from saying heck yes to the things that you really want to say yes to. And I think one of the reasons why I love the concept of this November so much is it is so hard to say no. So many clients that I work with, and let's be honest, I'm right there with them, have a hard time saying no because we don't want to disappoint people. We're afraid of what people might say. Sometimes the things we're saying no to are things that we want to do. There just isn't enough time in the day. And so while we have explored this concept of how to say no, heck, we've done workshops on this entire concept of how you can say no and how no is a complete sentence. What we're going to explore today in Thoughtfully Fit Thursday is how to hear a no. And specifically, how to hear a no with the thoughtfully fit practice of flexibility. Because if we turn the tables a little bit, as hard as it might be to say no for all those reasons that we just discussed, it's also can be hard to hear no. And when we hear no, sometimes what happens is we can get into a place of judgment. We can get into a place where then we try to start convincing the other person of why they should say yes, of why they should do what we want them to do. And in a way, we then perpetuate exactly why it is so difficult for people to say no, because then it turns into this difficult, awkward, not fun conversation. So I'm going to share with you 3 strategies for how you can hear that no while practicing the thoughtfully fit practice of flexibility. And if you remember, the practice of flexibility is all about stretching for acceptance. It doesn't mean you have to approve. It doesn't mean you have to be happy with it, that you're okay with it even. But when you're practicing flexibility, you're stretching to accept what it is that the other person is choosing, because you can't control what they're doing. You can only control you and specifically how you respond. And so that's our focus. When you hear that no, how can you thoughtfully respond? And so the first strategy here is to listen. And so when you ask somebody a question, do they want to go out someplace? Do they want to commit to something? Do they want to spend time doing something? Whatever it is that you're asking and you hear that no. Sometimes if you get an email or you're having that conversation with them, just as humans, what our brain can do is we can stop listening and start thinking of our next argument. Okay, they said no, I'm going to have to think of something else to convince them. I'm going to have to think of my next argument. You're in your head already moving on to that next argument that you want to make with them. And so if you're going to practice flexibility, this is the strategy here is to listen, as simple as that might sound. Because the goal here is not to change their minds. The goal here is for you to hear what they're saying. And again, it might be they're just saying no as that complete sentence that they just said no, and acknowledging, okay, you're hearing that no. They don't need to tell you a why. They don't, right? When we say no as a complete sentence, that means accepting that sometimes a no is a no. And so just really listening before jumping into that part of your brain that wants to convince them otherwise or fix it or get your way. The second tip here then is to avoid the assumption. I know there are some times where I will ask somebody if they want to do lunch or go for a walk or go out for dinner, and I'll get the no. And part of me is like, oh, I wonder, that must mean that they don't want to be my friend anymore. That must mean that they don't want to meet with me to discuss this possible business potential. They're just not interested in meeting. They're not interested in spending time with me. That's quite the jump, isn't it? You might be hearing that and say, "Jill, what are you talking about? They just said no to having lunch or going for a walk. Maybe they don't want to go for a walk. Maybe they're busy that day. Maybe they just are still not going out to eat." There could be so many reasons. And so it's always easier to do with other people. And this is then the challenge for you when you're practicing flexibility to avoid those assumptions. That if somebody's saying no, it doesn't necessarily mean anything else other than they're saying no to what you are asking them to do right then in that moment. And the third one then is to check your judgment. This is one skill that I've been learning from Darcy that I admit I have a hard time with when she says no judgment. Part of me is like, how can you not have judgment? That, something's happening here. How can you not be judging what's going on there and have an opinion, and maybe a strong opinion on what's happening? And the lesson that Darcy has reinforced with me over time that, yeah, judging is part of our humanity. It's hard to turn off that part of your brain. But that doesn't mean you have to follow through on that judgment and feed into that judgment and allow it to get in the way of the relationship. And so specifically, if you ask somebody to do something and they say, "No, I don't have time," and you're thinking, "What do you mean you don't have time? You don't even have kids. You're not even working. Your kids are back in school. You have plenty of time. What do you mean you don't have time?" Okay, that's judgment. That's judgment there. And obviously, if you say that out loud, it's going to have an impact on the relationship. And even if you think it's going to have an impact on your relationship. Again, those assumptions might come into play, and it's just going to change the way that relationship is. And so, again, as hard as it might be, just to check that judgment. Again, don't try to avoid the judgment. That's part of our brain. And it's okay to be disappointed of like, "Oh gosh, why can't they come out? What could they possibly doing that's more important than fill in the blank of whatever it is that you might be looking for?" Acknowledge that judgment, but then check that judgment and choose if you want to invest in the relationship and continue to nurture that relationship as opposed to taking a knock at it. So we've been talking specifically about how to hear that no with flexibility. And perhaps you need to step into another practice of thoughtfully fits, maybe step into balance if you are really needing something, right? If there's a need that you're looking to have a conversation and there's a need that needs to be met, but then have that conversation while still accepting the no that you might have received for something else. There's a difference between saying, "Hey, can you come out for dinner on this night? Or can you come to my party that I'm having um, on the weekends?" And hearing a no to that. And then stepping into balance if you want, and to say, "Hey, I totally respect that you're not available, not interested, not your scene to come to a big party, but I would love to spend some time with you at some point before the end of the year, or at some point. What would work best for you?" Instead of trying to convince them of, "Oh, the party's going to be fun. Oh, you really need to come out. I really need you to come out," and laying on the guilt trip. You know what it's like to get the guilt trip. Nobody likes that. And so if needed, to step into balance and find that win-win of how you might maybe connect over Zoom or connect one-on-one in order to get that need met that you have with the relationship, while still practicing that flexibility to accept that person for exactly who they are. And during NO-vember, encouraging people and accepting and creating that safe space for them to say that no as well. So once again, let's just quickly review by engaging that thoughtfully fit core, pause, think, act. When you hear that no, hit the pause button. Before you jump into trying to convince or fix or change their mind, hit that pause button and then think. How can you accept the no that you're hearing here? And what's most important to you about the relationship here? And then act in that thoughtful way. Don't act on your autopilot on default. Act in a thoughtful way with your friend or whoever it is that you are having that conversation with and that you heard that no from. The final thing that I just love to encourage you to do is to check out the um our online community. It's Thoughtfully Fit Encore. If you go to Facebook, you can find the Encore group by searching for Thoughtfully Fit. You'll find it pretty quickly. We were talking about this idea of No-vember in Encore, and we'd love for you to join us and contribute to the conversation, not just about this, but about other Thoughtfully Fit topics as well. My name's Jill Mueller. Thank you so much for joining me today. Have a wonderful Thoughtfully Fit Thursday.